I was asking you earlier what it is that you're expecting from the finance minister. Do tell us.
Well, we're expecting measures to alleviate the poor from the burden that is imposed by the many of the tax hikes that are, particularly the VAT. You know that as COSATU were opposed to the VAT hike that has happened last year, and in this case now we expect that the minister, in fact our demand is that he must increase the amount of electricity and water that is supplying to the indigent families as part of alleviating. They must put that thing as an exemption of taxes VAT hike. But we also want him to announce measures that are going to make sure that eventually taxes is reduced back to what it used to pay before. Secondly, we want an alternative to the public transport infrastructures. We don't think that e-toll should be something that we continue to talk about here. Our view is that the government must announce alternatives in which we are going to continue to fund the countries that they've built in Gauteng and everywhere else in the country where actually the toll gates are very high expensive. Now, thirdly, we are expecting that this parliament have been delaying to pass a PIC bill, which has been there to make sure that there's transparency in the PIC, there's investment guidelines, and also there's a representations of labor in the boards of PIC. We're hearing about the money of workers disappearing, been invested in all sorts of wrong areas without the voices of the workers and without transparency and without guidelines. It is our hope that this speech is going to address that thing, but also the infrastructure in these countries. Buildings are collapsing. They have been neglected for many years. Dams are collapsing. Bridges are collapsing. Students are dying in schools. Workers are dying at work. What is it that the minister is going to do to put money into the public works department in order to make sure that the infrastructure in this country is maintained, and so that it doesn't become a death trap for workers who work every day and go to work and otherwise end up dying at work?
These are a lot of imperatives that you're speaking to, but isn't there a concern on your part that with Eskom being such an important stakeholder in the economy, and with the kind of money that government will need to give to it, some of these imperatives may not get the funding that's needed?
Well, I was saying in addition to those, which were obvious, since this morning we've been talking about the economy, we've been talking about Eskom, we stated clearly our opposition to what government seems to think that they are going to do, unbundle and retrench workers. Our view is that it's given, it's not avoidable, that this budget speech must talk to how they're going to save Eskom from collapsing. None of us can afford for it to collapse, but all we are saying is that the economic growth in this country is not one-sided. You can save Eskom, you can have electricity, but if workers are dying and if buildings are collapsing, if workers can't afford to pay for the transport to go to work, because 25% of salary of each worker is spent on transport. If the transport can't be accessible and affordable, there's no economy that's going to grow. If with the poor salary that workers are getting, they're still burdened with a VAT increase, and there's no alleviation on the basic necessities like electricity and water. So there will be no economy that will grow. So we are saying that the minister has a tough task to find a balance so that indeed the economy must grow, but it must grow with a healthy people. For instance, public health institutions is collapsing. We don't hear the minister now talking about how they are going to make sure that the government finally implement the national health insurance so that the health of our people is not reliant on whether people have got medical aid or not, or strengthening a private health system that looks at people who are sick in this country as a market from which they must make money. Our view is that the state needs to strengthen the public health system so that the poor, the sick, the elderly, the unemployed must receive quality universal health care services.
Let me interject there. Some years ago, when it was introduced, the employment tax incentive, COSATU in particular was quite critical of it. It's been running for the past few years, and of course the president did say that it's going to be extended for another 10 years. What is COSATU's reaction? Because we are expecting that they will be talking about funding for that today.
But like we have warned, I'm sure everyone sees that there are no results of that. The unemployment rate has grown, even when with that thing that we have opposed. The 10 million worker people are not employed today. That 8% is an unemployment rate in this country. So we had warned, because that thing was used to recycle. You know, it was going the same way with the corporate tax incentives that was given to corporates. That it was moved from 35% to 28%. But the companies are continuing to rake in profits, but continue to lay off workers. They continue to not create more jobs, but they take profit and they embark on an investment strike, sitting on trillions of rands, not investing in the economy. So 3 years or 4 years, this thing has been running. Unemployment is still extremely high, because what they do, they get the tax incentive there, they reduces the workers. After 2-3 years, because you get to 40 years, they take you out, they put another young worker, they're exploiting the disparate young peoples of our country who are looking for jobs. They are using them, they are employing them in order for them to get the tax incentive and also get a tax rebate, which is an exploitation of another kind.
Mike, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for your perspective on issues. That was Mike Shingane. He's the first Deputy President at COSATU. We're going to go for a short break and of course have more budget coverage for you.